Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Cara. Do I have salad in my teeth?
No, but I would tell you.
I know you would. That's why I'm asking you.
You know what else I'm going to
Zoom.
tell you before we start our podcast? I'm going to remind you, because I'm going to remind all of our listeners that we have a membership.
Does it tell you if you have salad in your teeth?
We should add that functionality.
I know.
It tells
there should be a bucket.
It tells you pretty much everything else that you need to know about raising kids between the ages of 8 and 18. And I think a really important part of raising those kids is teaching them to tell people when they have salad in their teeth.
Totally. I always say to my kids, if there is food in my teeth, please tell me. So instead they're like, you are so gross. There's like half a head of kale in your teeth. I'm like, thank you. Could you tell me, but tell me more nicely? And is that more nicely or nicer?
Oh, I don't know. But we should go on to our AI bot and ask for a conversation starter about salad in the teeth.
Yes.
So we do have a membership and we want to make sure everyone knows about it, mostly because we are not great about sharing very exciting information. So I'm going to be great about it. We're terrible. So I'm going to be great about it for 30 seconds and say the number of times we get questions from people about how to find good data, how to get into tricky conversations, where to find articles about fill in the blank, physical, social, emotional. And it turns out we have it all in one place for you. We also have on our website, lessawkward.com, a resources link that links out to all of the amazing advice that we draw from, because we're big advocates of pointing to where we get our information. There are really smart people in the world who are doing research, who have studied corners of what we talk about in great detail. So if you go onto lessawkward.com, in the footer, there's a link to resources. You can find resources about almost anything. We're slow to upload some. If you have suggestions about resources that you love, share those suggestions with us. All right, moving on.
To a messier
topic. Okay, I'm a thirdborn and you're a thirdborn.
We're both thirdborns of 4 children.
We are. You know what we're going to talk about today?
Not us.
Not us. We're going to talk about the first pancake.
Oh, God.
The firstborn. And we're going to talk about how parents, grandparents, caretakers, I mean, quite frankly, how we all mess it up as we learn to raise kids. So your title for this episode is Screwing Up the First Pancake?
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could say burning the first pancake or
undercooking.
Something like that.
I mean, mine is
undercooking, overcooking. Yes. Yeah. So I have been sitting in, and I did float this idea to Cara, but she rejected this as an episode concept. So I'm just going to work it in here.
It will shock our listeners that I reject some concepts. Yes. Okay, go on.
So I wanted to do, I think it was actually a newsletter that I wanted to write. I wanted to write about parental guilt, because what's amazing about kids getting older, one of the things that's amazing is it's so fun when your kids get older. I love, love, love parenting my older kids. I love hanging out with their friends and my nieces and nephews. I love older kids. So that's the great part. The less great part is, particularly because we do the work of reading all of the best research and expert voices out there about parenting, is I seem to be increasingly aware of all of the ways in which I really screwed up as a parent. And so as you all know, Cara claims to be glasses half full, which I'm not sure she can make that claim, but I'm going to let her make that claim. And I'm for sure
not until you make it, Vanessa.
No, totally. I'm going to manifest being a half as glass full person. And I'm a very positive, warm, friendly person, but I am not an optimistic person. I'm not a glasses half full person. And I am married to someone who is decidedly not a glasses half full person. So I'm sitting in my parental guilt of the ways I've messed up. And I'm thinking about all of you listening who may be keeping me company on the guilt couch.
Right. And so the reason I rejected the framing that you're trying to hoist upon us is not that it's a glasses half empty versus glasses half full philosophy. It's more that I just don't see how that helps us through. So instead,
it's just a starting point.
It's just a starting point. But I wanted to talk about it's the same meat, I promise, but it's through the lens of what drives that guilt and how we mess up.
Right.
And I think the most important
and how we move on.
Correct. And the most important piece of this conversation. So when you and I speak to audiences, we make them laugh when we say they need trusted adults who they can go to. And you need trusted adults too, right?
And it's so funny, Car, because when I came up with that line, I was like, oh, this is a nice parallel. I never imagined that it would get a laugh. It
steals the show.
But
it steals the show.
It gets a laugh.
And likewise, do-overs are not just for our kids, right? They're very much for us. And, psychologists use the term repair. We've talked to Elisa Pressman a lot about repair. There are a lot of people who lean into the concept of repair. It's a very important concept. It's the same thing as when we say taking do-overs. So much of loving a tween and teen, raising a tween and teen, I'm going to throw 20-somethings in there too, is learning from our mistakes. And so instead of viewing this through the lens of our guilt, which we could do, but instead, I do want to be an optimist in this conversation and view it through the lens of learning from our mistakes and recognizing this sort of singular experience of what it is to do these things for the first time, to make these decisions for the first time. And I'm going to kick off the conversation by describing something that happened to me just this week. I was speaking to a group. There happened to be a lot of pediatricians in the audience, and the pediatricians started to talk about how hard parents are on themselves when they are trying to follow rules and guidelines that the world is telling them to follow in order to raise safer, healthier, and ultimately happier kids. And how parents are starving for this advice and implementing all these pieces of advice they're getting. By the way, some of the pieces of advice conflict and they don't know what to do with that. And they're still trying to implement it. And it's like they're trying to be A students in parenting. And these are almost always parents of firstborns, because by the time you try that strategy, you realize it does not work, that no one piece of advice is true for every family and every kid within every family. And so it's inevitably first-time parents, grandparents, caretakers who are struggling with what to do with all the information that's coming their way, how to implement it, and how to take a do-over, how to pivot when it doesn't work. And what was interesting is they were talking about it in the context of social media and voices that parents are listening to on social media. And they were talking about specific pieces of advice that have kind of risen to the top of the zeitgeist, and parenting strategies that they're using that don't work, that don't work, but they can't stop themselves because they're trying to do right by their kids. I've never met a parent who isn't trying to do right by their kids, right? Neither have you. So the question here is partly, how do we not mess it up the first time? That's going to be one question. And then the second question is, how do we forgive ourselves and pivot and actually take a do-over in a way that isn't just making us feel better, but is actually making change for the kid?
Right. I mean, I keep thinking about, and we framed it as first children or oldest children, but this also very much applies to only children. And
first and only.
There are some examples. Like in my house, my oldest child says he wishes we had had one child. And my second child, him. And my second child says he wishes we just had him and his older brother. And my third child says she wishes we just had her and her two older brothers, and obviously my youngest doesn't participate in that. He just tells us he will not be having 4 children when he is an adult. So in that messaging, it tells me my children feel really comfortable letting me know that no matter where they are in the birth order, I have somehow failed them.
Oh, that's so funny. I interpreted it as you did great by birthing me and I broke the mold and then you were done. So
Oh,
I would
that's a
see
nice
it
way of, that's of course
because
you
I
would.
am a
I know,
glasses half
because
full
you are
person, Vanessa.
theoretically a glasses half full person. Um, but I keep thinking back to, and my mother-in-law and I laugh about this all the time. So I happen to have one of the kindest mothers-in-law in the entire world. Like she really is an incredibly supportive, loving person. And when I used to show up in England, because that's we would get on a plane with tiny babies and go bring our tiny children to my in-laws. And, we'd be in the front seat in the bulkhead of the plane, and I would have cut up all his little strawberries and put them in one reusable pot, and his little grapes in half in another reusable pot, and it was all beautifully organized with his little veggie booty and little reusable bags. I mean, when I think about the time I spent, and I would pack for these trips with small children to go to England for I must have packed for a week getting him ready and, all that. So I wasn't working then. So I had time to do it. And I remember sitting in the bulkhead, and in those days, British Airways would give you a cot that would stick into the wall of the bulkhead. So literally the infant would lie on a cot with nothing on, no seatbelt or anything, but they would put straps over the side of the cot. I mean, when I think about the 900 ways that is so unsafe, and I would show up and he was like in his organic cotton onesies, and I there were years I brought like his whole a suitcase full of his Thomas the Tank Engine trains. Like I was trying to do everything right. And my mother-in-law and I now laugh because he would get to her house and he would immediately be placed in taken out of his organic cotton and into some polyester soccer outfit. And he would immediately reject the strawberries and the veggie booty and go straight for the Cadbury's chocolate and the Walker's potato chips. And, everything I tried to do with the best of intentions and based on everything I had read went out the window. And what mattered was that he was there to see his grandparents and his aunts and uncles, and he was just surrounded by love. And all the little things didn't matter. And you would think that I could take that metaphor of, as you said earlier, Car, just trying to do everything right and trying to listen to all the advice and just doing my best and focusing on them being surrounded by people who love them and care for them and want the best for them. And yet, over and over in parenting an oldest child, I keep going back to the tiny pieces of strawberries cut up in a little reusable pot.
Okay, but let's be clear that the two are not mutually exclusive. It's a beautiful metaphor, but they're not mutually.
They're not mutually exclusive, but they
feed your
require a perspective shift, which I know
Correct.
you're about to offer us all.
Well, I'm going to flash to a study that I've got to find this study. I read it about 8 or 10 years ago, and it was a study that looked at time parents spent volunteering at school compared with outcomes for their kid. And the outcomes that were measured in this study were success, academic success, and then sort of social success or happiness at school for the kid. The more time a parent volunteered at school, the less well their kid did. So that was amazing.
Did they control for like kids who were struggling and therefore the parents were spending more time at the school?
It's why I have to find the study because
Okay.
I don't remember. But what I do remember was that the bottom line conclusion takeaway was parents are volunteering at school because they believe that being part of their kids' lives at school will actually increase their kids' success at school across a number of variables. Like the teachers will appreciate that the parents are around, and the teachers might, like all things being equal, see where a kid has shown and they might be, give that kid the benefit of the doubt in whatever way. Or the parent is an integral part of the school community and brings some idea into the school that happens to really resonate with their kid, and their kid has this better school experience, whatever it is, right? But what it turns out is that the volunteerism at school, at many schools, not all schools, can end up sucking parents down a minutia rabbit hole that occupies a massive amount of their time, having nothing to do with their kid.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, in the evenings, when their kids are home doing homework and might need a little bit of parental guidance, or are jumping onto screens when they're not supposed to be, or, right? You can come up with 25 things. That parent is so busy clearing emails that have to do with the potluck that they're missing the opportunity to actually parent. In other words, they're giving the school what they're not giving their kid, was the conclusion of the researchers in this study. And, it was one study. I have no idea if there were 5 people in it or 5,000. So I would obviously have to find it and reread it.
PTAs across America have buried it in the deep dark web.
I mean, don't be mad at me if you are a school volunteer or if you're a school who needs volunteers. I'm not saying none, but it's a perfect example of where well-intentioned choices in parenting send us to a place that we are not intending to go. So now when we apply it to your example, what I would say is, what I'm hearing you describe is that you put all this effort into these quantifiable things that, I'm giving my kid access to this certain type of food and quality of food. I am making sure that everything around them is as safe and healthy as possible, right? It's not that you're bubble wrapping, it's that you're really trying to check all these boxes that are right. And actually, in hindsight, the thing that he needed as much as, if not more than, the healthy food, because the healthy food matters, right? But he needed the love and the joy and the flexibility of being in a new home with his extended family on a different continent. And he needed to learn how to roll with the punches. And he needed that skill set was more important than us managing all the other things going on around him. And so to that end, Vanessa, it's a beautiful metaphor because that's exactly right. And that's what we learn after the first kid. Also, there's no time to cut up all that fruit.
No, you're just like throwing things at them on the floor for them to pick up. I mean, the other thing that I think a lot about, and I'm not one of those people who looks at people with little kids and like telling them all the life lessons I've learned, nor am I that person, because this happened to me always, like standing online at the supermarket and you look at them and you're like, it goes so fast. Enjoy every second. Because when people said that to me, I was like, I'm not enjoying every second. This is hard and I'm tired and I'm in a crappy mood. So like, give me space not to enjoy it. But the thing that I do think a lot about, not a repair, this is really a do-over in that I'm trying to do it differently as my kids get older, is I was always in such a rush. Like, I just remember I was always rushing my oldest kids, like, tie your shoes, get your coat on, where's your bag? We were always like, we have to leave the park. It's time for a nap, or we got to get home. It's time for dinner. Whatever it was, I was always rushing. And part of it was because I guarded their sleep more than I guarded anything else in the world. Like, their sleep, a good sleep for them was more important to me than anything else. So
hallelujah, by the way.
Like,
hallelujah.
and by the way, they, thank God, we're all great sleepers, and they are all like these big, enormous, strong people. And I swear to God, it's because I was like so nuts about making sure they got sleep. But I am like, what is the rush? Like, what was I rushing for? So we were 3 minutes late to nursery school. So I have to wait 5 minutes while they tie their shoes. So they want to stay in the park a little bit longer. It was like I was checking the boxes, getting through my day from one thing to the next. And like, I think, frankly, just trying to get to the end of my day so I could be by myself for a while. My daughter still talks about how I made my kids go to bed like at 6:30, 7 o'clock. And in New York at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the summer, it's like fully bright outside and everybody was outside playing except my kids were in bed. Sorry, guys. But what I try to do differently now, particularly with my oldest, because the clock is ticking like he's almost done with college, is just to slow the hell down. Like just to stop rushing. And I can't go back and change how I was for all of those years, but that is one big thing that I am very much doing differently than I did then.
And I'm going to give you my list because I actually have a little bit of a list of the things that over time, I think if I was in practice now in the office, these are the things I would say to the parents and grandparents. Grandparents, this is big for grandparents because grandparents are really masterful at thinking that the parents' rules are meant to be broken because then you're a cooler grandparent. But these are the things I would say. So the first thing I would say is setting limits is extremely important. Kids love rules. But if you have a consequence, and you must have a consequence for the limit, follow through. Follow through because you have to anticipate a child's ability to become an epic negotiator. They are so good at negotiating. Manipulating. Manipulating, by the way, is not a bad thing. It's not a negative term, but they're so good and so effective at it. And you have to anticipate that. And the first time through, you don't anticipate that. So if you set limits and don't have consequences, I promise you that kid is going to run circles around you and control everything. If you set limits, do have consequences and don't follow through, that's an even worse position to be in because that kid has just learned where your points of vulnerability are. So step one is set your limits, figure out your consequences ahead of time. Do not negotiate in the moment and follow through. My second piece of advice is rigid materials crack. So even though you want to set your limits and have consequences, you've got to be flexible with how you set this all up. That what works in one house and looks like, oh my God, that I want to do that. I want to have my kid respond to me in that way may not work in your household for 25 different reasons. What someone tells you on social media, what a parenting influencer tells you on social media might sound great. And you might try it 5 different ways. And it may not work for you and for your kid, or your kid may not be at the right developmental stage or, right? So setting limits, very important, but rigidity is going to work against you. And that is another lesson learned with firstborns. Okay, I have 2 more. One is Band-Aids don't heal. And what I mean by that is sometimes our solution to a problem with a kid in our life is to throw a Band-Aid on it, whatever that looks like. But what happens to a cut under a Band-Aid? It stays sort of damp and moist and it does not heal quickly, right? We know we need to air it out in order to heal it. The same is true of these solutions that we throw at kids. And it's a lesson we learn the first time through, right?
Right. I mean, this is one I think a lot about because when you think about raising a kid, it's essentially getting to know a person as they are growing and changing at the same time. So it's not like getting to know an adult who's basically a fully formed human being with a relative capacity for change and growth. This is like literally getting to know someone as they are becoming a different person over and over again. And
Correct.
When I think about that concept of Band-Aids don't heal, and I think about the times I kept a Band-Aid on too long. When I think about the times I should have put a Band-Aid on and didn't, and the cut got infected, and then I had a bigger thing to deal with. I think about the times, the very occasional times when I found the balance just right and made sure to get to them before bed so they could take the Band-Aid off and wash the cut and air it out and dry it off, did it all right. And I think the hardest thing for me is that intersection of the decision making about how do you care for a particular kid. It's like the intersection of 3 axes, right? It's like the decision making meets a growing and evolving, changing human being on a sort of exponential trajectory. And the third axis is an inexperienced decision maker.
Us.
And us,
Yes.
the people putting on the Band-Aids or not putting on the Band-Aids. And that those three lines intersecting into one point, over and over, sort of re-intersecting. I just think the potential for, messing up, as we said earlier, is so high. And yet it's not malicious. It's not volitional. It's just the perfect storm of circumstances.
Which is where your concept of guilt comes in, because we must give ourselves grace. We are learning too. They are learning. We are learning. And if we don't acknowledge the guilt and give ourselves some grace, we will make some decisions that feel bad, but turned out to be the right decisions. We will make some decisions that feel bad and turned out to be the wrong decision. Okay. I have one more little poignant truism. And this, we all know, whether it's our lived experience as kids growing up or our lived experience as adults helping to raise kids. The lessons learned with the first are so profound. This does not mean that the next time you go through it with a totally different kid, you'll have it all worked out. Yes, the first pancake is usually either burned and wet in the middle or just does not brown, right? It's like one or the other. But for me, at least, when I'm making pancakes, it takes like the third or fourth batch before I've nailed it and they're all looking perfect. The second born is going to teach you a whole different set of lessons. And so unless you have kids who are protoplasmically identical and have the exact same lived experiences, and even then, I don't think it's never sort of teed up the same way twice. It's just that our confidence as decision makers and as leaders in the family structure is growing. And it's sort of our mindset that is shifting. I think the growth mindset concept here is really important when applied to raising kids, which is this acknowledgement that we can learn how to do this better. It does not mean we will have an easy time through the next time. And this is where the grandparent piece really plays in, because they have had a lot of lived experience. They did do this, but times have changed. Mm-hmm. It's a totally different world from the world they raised their kids in. And so their learning curve is steep as well. They need to have a growth mindset as well. And giving everyone permission to learn from both their successes and from their errors, I think it's the greatest way to go through this. It makes it more fun.
It's so funny. I was just having a conversation with my dad the other day because he had a very special interaction with my oldest, who is also the oldest grandchild of 14 grandchildren on my side of the family. And I'm not going to get into the details, but they had a very beautiful text exchange. And I said to my dad, I said, the research tells us that all a kid needs is one trusted adult to show up for them. And the mental health and success outcomes for that child are significantly increased by having that one adult. And I said, but think about it, Dad, that he doesn't just have one adult. He has many adults who love him. And I said, in this case, it's you. And they do have a very special relationship. And I said, it's you. And you showed up for him in a way that, frankly, I don't think I would have been capable of showing up for him in. And my dad, and this could be any grandparent, aunt, uncle, family friend, it could be anyone who's not us. He said, I had no idea. I didn't know that there was like a body of research about this. And then he felt so motivated to show up even more in ways that he could and that were authentic to him and their relationship, because it was just affirming that by showing up in this kid's life, that he was really doing so much to love and support him and put him on his way. And so it kind of brings us back to the showing up in England with the, pots of strawberries and changing him into polyester and feeding him chocolate. I think the thing that I continue to struggle with, and I will sit with this conversation and think more about it, and Cara maybe will do. I was actually sort of fantasizing that our 2 second-borns would come and do an episode with us this summer before they go to
That
college.
fantasy will become reality. It might be like 3 words spoken between them.
It might be a silent episode, but they're really lovely.
So everyone can watch it on
beings.
YouTube and just see them sit like this.
So I would love to do a follow-up episode to this, partially because there's stuff I'm still thinking with, and partially because I'd love to get those two on because they're really wonderful people. The thing that I'm sitting with is the choices that I made when my kids were younger that have long-term consequences on their lives, whether it's health or well-being or academics or social or any of those things. To me, the challenge is, because I always say to my mom, like anytime I write anything or record an episode, I get a call from my mom. And it's usually sounds something like this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
No wonder you wanted a guilt episode.
I thought I was doing the right thing. And I always say to her, Mom, you were doing the best you could with the information you had at the time. And I tell myself that also. However, as you watch, God willing, the long life of your children, you think about the choices you made along the way and how that has impacted them in the long term. That's the thing that I'm continuing to grapple with. I'm trying to have it not be with guilt, more with curiosity and noticing. But that is, I am sitting in that a bit, and it's not going to be resolved in an episode.
So I'm going to land in this very meta place, which is if we learn to give ourselves grace as the people who are raising these children, and we model that, then when we look back through the retrospectoscope, right, through the passage of time, when we can look back and it's 2020 vision there, and we see all the ways we made terrible decisions, not only will we be able to give ourselves grace, but we will have modeled for these very kids how to give us a little bit of a breather on the errors that we made.
And how to give themselves grace as they chart
which is
the course.
So much more important, actually, going forward. I can't wait for that episode with our 2 sons. Let's do it, Vanessa.
I think we might need to schedule it now so they can emotionally prepare for it. And if you have follow-up questions about this, if you've had experiences you want to share with us, this is not our usual episode. This is quite like a personal, raw episode, both as parents and for Cara also as a pediatrician, thinking about, how she approached the parents in her practice, which is really another super interesting conversation we can have. Share it with us, because really the goal of all of this is so that people who are looking at their slightly burned, slightly undercooked first pancakes, like, A, know you're not alone, and B, like, if you throw some chocolate chips in there, they're actually still really delicious.
Bye, Vanessa.
Bye, Cara. Thank you so much for listening. You can email us with questions, feedback, or episode requests at podcast@lessawkward.com.
If you want to learn more about what we do to make this whole stage of life less awkward for everyone involved, our parent membership, our school health ed curriculum, our keynote talks, and more are all at lessawkward.com.
And if you want products that make puberty so much more comfortable, visit myumla.com.